Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to random deep dives into whatever tickles our fancy, or RDDIWTOF, a podcast where we take random deep dives into whatever tickles our fancy. I'm Grace,
And I'm
and you're,
Peter.
you're
Hi.
that's where you introduce yourself. As you can probably tell, this is the very first time that we are doing this podcast, so it may be a little bit chaotic, but I hope you embrace the chaos along with us and join us for the ride. So, I think the topic of this podcast is pretty self-explanatory. We're going to take deep dives into anything that we feel like chatting about. And I think mostly it's going to be stuff that's science fiction and fantasy related. What do you think, Peter?
I think so. That's what we're both interested in. But it can be anything.
Yeah.
And at the moment, we've decided to talk about Avatar The Last Airbender to start off with.
Yes. And just to be clear, we are talking about the recent Netflix adaptation. Although I think in the conversation we will probably, draw a couple of links back to the original Nickelodeon animation because we're both fans of the original.
Yeah, absolutely. And uh, maybe we'll mention the movie at some point. We'll see how we go. Maybe not.
I was wondering if you would bring that up. That may be difficult for me because I have actually never seen the movie. You have, right, Peter?
I have, but don't worry. I don't think you're missing out on that much.
Wait, how
Um,
many times have you seen the movie?
I I think I've only seen it once.
Okay.
I've seen the Nickelodeon series a few times.
Yes, that was going to lead into my first question actually, but you were going to say something.
I was gonna ask how much of the Nickelodeon series have you seen, and what did you think of it?
Mm. Well, I thought it, I think I have seen the Nickelodeon series. I've definitely seen it all the way through at least once, and I have rewatched quite a few of the episodes, but probably not in chronological order. So bits and pieces here and there. And I don't know if you remember, but I was introduced to Avatar The Last Airbender by you. Um, I think you were watching it in the living room. You must have been in primary school or early high school, and I think I was in high school. And I walked in and I was like, "What are you watching?" And then I ended up sitting down and watching pretty much the rest of the episode with you.
I actually have no memory of this,
Okay, great.
but I do remember, yeah, watching. I do remember watching it with you, or at least a number of episodes with you, all those years ago.
Yeah, yeah, nostalgic.
Yeah, it is nostalgic. I remember seeing it when it was on TV as well. So watching the episodes in the wrong order and missing a bunch because it was just on TV. Back
Ah,
then, we didn't have streaming to watch all the episodes whenever we want. So that was different. That was a world away.
yeah. So do you think that the first time you watched it, you actually didn't watch it in chronological order?
No, I think there was this one episode which showed on TV a lot, which is The Great Divide. And I think I may have watched that one first. Because that one is, yeah, I was on TV all the time.
From here on, Peter is going to demonstrate his excellent knowledge of Avatar, the
No.
original series. How many times do you think you've watched it?
uh, from, if we're talking from start to finish all of the episodes, I've only watched it, I think, twice,
Mm.
maybe three times.
Mm.
But yeah, I've seen random episodes here and there a bunch of times as well. So I'll definitely have gaps in my knowledge. I'm not an encyclopedia by any measure.
Well, I feel like we could potentially spend this whole episode talking about the original. Well, you could. I don't think I could because I've actually forgotten a lot of it, sadly. But what we actually want to spend this episode discussing is episode one of the Netflix adaptation. So we're going to aim to cover one episode, right, per podcast episode
Yep.
and do a deep dive into what happened.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Cool. I'm excited too. Okay. Okay. So episode one. Episode one, there's gonna be a lot to talk about. Episode one was aptly titled Aang because it is the episode in which we are introduced to Aang, the title character. Um, and the opening scene. Oh my goodness, do you remember what the opening scene was? It was a completely different opening scene from the animation.
Yes, so it starts with the pre-war backstory, which is not really shown in the original series until later. So
Mm,
basically, the whole first scene is new. The whole first scene with the Earthbender discovering the war plans, showing
mm,
Sozin and all of that.
mm,
Yeah,
mm, mm.
it was all new, and I think it added a lot. What did you think of it?
Yeah, so classic sort of throwing us straight into a fast-paced action scene, which is, I'm a gladly say I'm a sucker for that, and I happily got sucked into the chase scene with the Fire Nation soldiers pursuing the Earthbender through the alleys of I assume it was a Fire Nation city. I'm not totally sure. And then, yeah, the Earthbender gets captured. And it was that scene where his friend was like waiting on the steed, the faithful steed, and he like throws the Fire Nation plans to the friend and goes, run, of course. And I was just thinking, like, couldn't the friend on the steed have just like run to grab the other Earthbender, like run back and grab the other Earthbender instead of just
Yeah, just
waiting
pick him
there
up.
on the
Just pick him
steed?
up.
Yeah, it would have been so much
Yeah,
easier
it's a
than the
bit
other
funny.
guy
He
on
has
foot
the steed.
running to. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, that doesn't serve enough dramatic tension. So obviously that's not what's going to happen. Um, and therefore, Earthbender's got to be captured and taken back to Fire Lord Sozin, who um, quite dramatically burns him.
Yeah, that was intense. Right off the start, you get an on-screen death, um, which is pretty intense to start off with. I believe that the Nickelodeon series had no on-screen deaths at all because it was for kids. It's on Nickelodeon, so it's a pretty different tone, I find, which is not a criticism. It's just yeah, it's different, isn't it?
That's really interesting to hear. So in the Nickelodeon series, people just got beaten up or died off screen, I assume.
I believe so. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I noticed as the episode one was starting, I mean it's an M rating, which I noticed straight away. I thought, okay, is this gonna be pitched as a kids show? Is this for, people like us who are grown up fans of the original series, but very much kids inside? And yeah, you're right. It really does that early on-screen death is very intense to watch, and it really does set quite a grim tone to the show.
Yeah, and it kind of carries that same tone through well when we see the airbenders, doesn't it? And I initially you see the airbenders and they're having a nice time. They have a festival coming up, and then they get attacked. And that's also a lot of it's a lot of well
It's heavy.
fire and burning and death. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is completely different from the way they started it in the original animation, right? Which is Katara and Sokka finding Aang popping out of the
Yeah.
iceberg. And was he like completely disorientated and then really excited to find himself at the southern water pole? Oh, southern,
Yeah.
you know,
He
in
yeah, that's right. He was a bit disorientated for a second, and then he jumps up and he wants to go penguin sledding, and he's just there to have fun. It's a really that sets the tone for the
it
Nickelodeon
does. It
series, I
does.
think.
It's very Aang.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like 100 years in an iceberg. No, let's not worry about that. Otter penguins, let's go sledding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think that the way they've done it here is it's got a more, I guess, realistic in a way is the that's because war is pretty horrible. And this show is all about war. So well, the way they've done it here, I think has a bit of realism to it.
I actually liked that they showed the airbenders and the genocide of the airbenders. I know some fans might disagree with that, but I think because we didn't get to see much of it actually seeing it happen is really like it packs this huge emotional punch. I was like quite distressed watching it. I was like, oh my gosh, Gyatso and all these amazing airbenders living their, idyllic, happy monk life. It was very sad, and I thought it was a good story choice to show it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, definitely.
What did you think of Gyatso?
Oh, that's a good question. I think they nailed the way he's kind of a wise old man, but he's also a really playful friend to Aang. And he's an interesting character because he's both of those. And I think they really captured it.
Yeah,
What did you
I
think?
I totally agree with that. I thought his portrayal, yeah, exactly as you said, it really struck those, it really captured those dual sides of Gyatso perfectly, and he was so wholesome. Like I think everyone needs a Gyatso in their lives.
Yes, yes.
There was one other thing I wanted to ask you, which was an important question. What did you think of the new introduction? Because it is a bit different. It had Kyoshi narrating, and the narration was slightly different. Um, did you have any thoughts about that at all?
Good question. Um, I I think maybe because I'm older now than when I watched the original series, I don't find it as nice to have the world building narrated to me. As
Mm,
like I think as a kid, I was completely fine with it. Now that I'm older, it feels a little bit um forced.
mm,
That's not necessarily because it's any worse than the original. I think maybe it's just an age thing. I'm not sure.
mm,
Um, so that was I felt that when I was listening to the narration, but I can't yeah quite put my finger on exactly what it
yeah,
was.
yeah.
As for the rest of the introduction, I thought the animation was incredibly beautiful, especially like the airbending when they show the airbender and there's like it uses leaves because that's the other thing about the animation, right? In the Nickelodeon series, you can physically draw airwaves.
Mm,
This one, it's a bit trickier. So they had this beautiful scene with I think it was maybe cherry blossom leaves or something, and they show the airbending and the wind, and I just thought the whole opening sequence visually was really beautiful.
yeah, yeah, agree. I think the visual effects, you kind of get a sense that um, the show is gonna have some really nice visual effects with all the bending.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess you're right. The narration kind of has like sets a bit more of that. It has that sort of fantasy prologue vibe to it, doesn't it? It's sort of like you're opening a fantasy book and it's kind of setting the lay of the land, which does kind of set certain expectations
Yeah.
um, as to what kind of narrative you're getting into.
Hmm.
I quite liked the simple intro to each episode where there's those sort of broad brush strokes, colorful brush strokes, and then the title of the episode comes up. And I don't know if you noticed, but there was like a Chinese character um, done in sort of brushstroke calligraphy that was um, imposed on the background. I liked that detail because each episode has a character for a different element. So in this first episode, it was chi or hei in Cantonese. So chi in Mandarin or hei in Cantonese, which means air, but it can also mean like energy. And then, yeah, in some of the subsequent episodes, they had shui or soy, which means water. And then they had later on four, fire. And I'm pretty sure one of them was earth. Well, it would have to be. Um, so I thought that was a really nice, elegant touch. I liked that.
Yeah, that I actually didn't notice that, but now that you pointed out, that sounds excellent, and I'll have to actually go back and check.
Oh, you didn't notice it. That's cool.
Uh,
I'm glad I pointed out one thing that you didn't notice. Yes, I was sitting there in the intro and I was like, oh, this is a very pleasant, peaceful episode introduction. I like it. I must mention this. Well, we talked a little bit about where were we up to? Oh, yes, the genocide of the airbenders. I actually felt there was this scene where like Gyatso was herding the children into one of the towers, and that was quite reminiscent of Attack of the Clones, Star Wars Episode 2, um, and Anakin's mad rampage. Um, I thought
oh yeah.
was really quite resonant of that scene from Star Wars. That scene is also the reason why I think Anakin is completely irredeemable, but that's a
Oh,
conversation for another time.
so that's a strong statement.
He should not have had a redemption arc. Anyway, back to Avatar. Where did we go next? Okay, Wolf Cove. Then we went to Wolf Cove and the Southern Water Tribe, and then we start at the place where the story starts in the animation. So we meet Sokka and Katara
Yep.
in Wolf Cove. I'm not totally sure. Do you know if that's a new name, Wolf Cove? Because I thought that they were just known as the Southern Water Tribe.
I think you're right. Unless I've also missed it, I don't remember them referring to Wolf Cove in the Nickelodeon series. Um, I noticed later on they also give a name to the Northern Water Tribe that I don't remember them ever mentioning in the Nickelodeon series. Again, unless I've drawn a
Mm,
blank.
mm,
So yeah, I think it's a nice touch to make the world seem a little bigger and have a bit more depth. I think to add names to specific names to places.
mm,
I like that touch.
mm. Yeah, yeah. And then we meet Sokka, we meet Katara, and I don't know, did you have any thoughts about Sokka and Katara and your first impressions on meeting them?
I like them. I like the way they bounce off each other, brother and sister. I liked Sokka's characterization as well because he was a bit of an ass at the start of the Nickelodeon series.
Yeah,
And I like that they kind of kept that because, well, it's nice to see him grow um, as the series goes on, and I'm looking forward to that. And
yeah,
he's funny.
yeah. I feel like they didn't make him annoying enough at the start. And like anyway, this is probably more of a discussion with the later episodes. I feel like he gets too like he's too serious and not like stupid, like not silly enough. Sorry, I shouldn't have said stupid. He wasn't silly enough at the start. Like I wanted to see a bit more of silly Sokka and maybe silly Aang. Like I guess I missed a bit of the playful vibe of the animation.
Yeah, definitely. They both Aang and Sokka were less goofy, I think,
Yeah.
compared to the Nickelodeon series.
Yeah, and I guess in a live action, like that was something I thought about before, when we were waiting for the live action adaptation to come out. I was just thinking it's so much easier to capture goofiness and playfulness when you've got the tools of animation at your disposal. You can make characters' expressions be really extreme and their body language be extremely wild and wacky. And I think it is harder, much harder to pull that off in live action maybe. Like you can't quite have live action actors do the same kind of slapstick, like, falling on the ground,
Yeah, yeah, it's not the
like
same.
collapsing on the ground whenever they're like overwhelmed. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
I think that's a big thing that's just a fact of changing the format from
yeah,
animated to live action.
yeah. Um, and I think that with both Sokka and Aang, you could kind of feel how much they were both shouldering their responsibilities and I think quite stressed by their responsibilities from even the first episode.
Yeah, I think they really hit that in this first episode because they do, yeah, address it in in the Nickelodeon series. That does come up later, I think, and it is touched on in the first episode, but I think they really in this Netflix series brought it forward, um, hit it harder in the first episode, just
Yeah.
showed them being more serious and more stressed.
Yeah. Yeah, I felt like Aang was very stressed, like right from the start, as soon as he was told you are the Avatar, and then the second revelation that he's, woken up 100 years later and he's been missing and the world has fallen under the tyranny of the Fire Nation. You could see all that like guilt and that feeling that he'd failed, like on his very expressive face.
Yes, they do seem to like those close-up shots of his face as he goes through a stress-induced monologue. Do you know what I mean? It seems like that happens in the first episode, and it does happen again later.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there were close-up shots on quite a few of the characters' faces and like lots of micro expressions happening. Like, I
Yes.
mean, I think the kid actors did a decent job with the script. I have some thoughts about the script. Did you have some thoughts? Like I felt like the script was um that was one thing that made me feel like, am I watching a show that's targeted towards children, or is it targeted more towards a more grown-up audience? Because I felt like the themes were quite heavy, right? The emotional tone that they set was fairly serious at times, but also the script felt a little bit childish. Like it was at times very superficial and the characters were kind of saying, like describing their own emotional tools and describing their own emotional progress to the viewer in their monologues. I don't know if that's something you noticed as well.
I think so, yeah. I guess in a kids show, I'm more open to the idea that well, kids may not pick up on the subtlety of certain things in the show, so they need the characters to spell it out. Whereas if you're targeting adults, you can probably not have the exposition explain the feelings and themes and trust the viewer to catch on to the subtlety. Whereas in this one, I think, yeah, as you said, there was a lot of that saying it to for the viewer's benefit, and so yeah, it did feel a bit odd at times. But again, I'm not too sure exactly what the putting my finger on what exactly made it a bit odd. But
Yeah.
yeah, there were a few moments where I thought the scripting was a bit odd.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it was that like they were progressing like they already feel like they're progressing super rapidly on this, emotional arc whereas we haven't really as viewers had the time to get to know these characters for the people that they are yet. And I think you kind of need that time to get to know the characters a bit more before you can follow them on that emotional arc that they're going to take into their fears or their past traumas, which Katara, Sokka, and Aang do do go on in subsequent episodes.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think as we're talking, I figured out that that I think they're pitching this show at grown-ups who want to watch a a version of a kids show that is nostalgic for them. I think that's what they're
Yes.
trying to do.
Well, here we are.
Yep, yep,
um,
we are the target audience.
yeah, I do want to add that when I talk about the characters being more serious and more stressed and less goofy. I It's different and it does strike me as different, and I think it took a bit of a shift for me to get into it. But that's not a criticism. I don't think it's bad, and in a way, it's just a reinterpretation of the characters and of the struggles that they go through. And I
Mm.
think when I cross that bridge, I'm there for it, and I do appreciate it.
Yeah, I think when I watch any adaptation, I try to let go a little bit of who the characters were in the original version and who I expect them to be in the adaptation. Just as you're saying, that they're going to be their own version
Right,
of the character for this particular adaptation.
right. What about Zuko?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're at the Southern Water Tribal Wolf Cove, and then we get to meet Zuko and Iroh in episode one, which is pretty fun. There's a very very dire looking Fire Nation ship that is sailing across the icy waters, belching heaps of black smoke. It's quite visually striking. And yeah, we meet Zuko and Uncle Iroh. Um, what are your thoughts before I jump in?
I thought I thought they were both great. I thought Zuko was very similar to his Nickelodeon version. I thought Iroh was very different.
Mm,
And in both cases, I ended up being happy with it, but Iroh did take me a bit to get used to him.
mm.
What about you?
Oh, that is so interesting because I completely agree with you. So that's really interesting. Uh, I don't know if you know, but Zuko is like one of my favorite characters from the original, and I really like how Zuko is portrayed in this adaptation. He really channels the angst of Zuko.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm definitely all there for Zuko's angst. And I also felt that Iroh was very different, so I'm curious to hear how you felt that Iroh was different.
Well, I think Iroh is an really interesting character because when we first see him, he is a bit of a comedic character.
Mm,
Obviously, he is a mentor character, and he fills that role for Zuko. But he's often talking about food. He's quite relaxed,
mm,
not very focused character at the start of the Nickelodeon series. And even during episode one of the Nickelodeon series and episode two, that first arc, when they capture Aang, Iroh is sleeping. I don't know if you remember. He slept through it.
when they first captured Aang.
That's right. Yeah, he was kind of a comedic character.
He was, and he was really zen. He was just like nothing phases me.
Yes, yes, really zen, kind of just goofy, and he's not at a first glance when you first meet Arrow in the Nickelodeon series, he doesn't seem like that serious a character.
Yeah.
But I think that makes it really more impactful when you see a bit more of him and he starts showing more of like what he cares about, the way he cares about Zuko. You see more of that as the series goes on in the Nickelodeon
Mm,
series, and then you learn about his past. You learn why he's the way he is, and then you see more of his determination when the time comes, and he shows some of his ferocity at times. And there's I think, a really great arc there for Iroh. I
mm,
think in this Netflix series, it feels like they've brought a bit of that forward because he is a bit more determined. He's more focused and a bit more of what I imagine as later series Iroh's personality
mm.
is now start of the series.
Yes, I definitely agree with what you said there. I feel like Iroh is so zen and chill, and that makes like when you learn about the loss and the trauma that he's kind of had to grapple with in the original series, it kind of makes it hits more um it's more poignant, right? When you realize like that's probably a
Yeah,
way that's the way that he's learnt to manage the loss that he's gone through. So whereas the the Netflix adaptation Iroh feels pretty intense from the start.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Mm. Yeah, but I think you said that you felt like Iroh kind of settled into his role and you kind of got used to how Iroh was being portrayed.
Yeah, I think it's a it's one of those things again where you can just kind of accept it's a bit of a different character. It's a different interpretation of the character. Um, I eventually got into it and I was like, okay, he's a more intense, involved, strategic person from the start, and I can see that. I can see how Iroh could be this person, so I ended up being okay with it. Um, yeah, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like this is something like I know we're only talking about the first episode and we'll probably get stuck into this more with the subsequent episodes, but
Right.
it does feel like the are being set up with very clear, like emotional arcs that they're gonna embark on and like things that they're struggling with. It's like this is one, it's been quite clearly set up, Zuko is yearning to win his father's approval. Katara is struggling to overcome the trauma of the loss of her mother. Sokka wants to live up to his father's expectations, and that's like quite it's quite obvious. And I feel like the emotional journey is quite fast paced. So I'm sure we'll get stuck into that a bit more when we talk about subsequent episodes. So I will not talk too much about that now and save something for next time
Yes, no, I agree, and I think you're absolutely right. But we can talk more about that as the future episodes come.
as
We
things
talk about that
progress.
as things
Yes,
progress.
yes, yes. So where were we in the episode? So Zuko and Iroh turn up at Wolf Cove, and there's this quite emotional scene where Sokka has to decide whether or not to give Aang up to Zuko, and Sokka ends up stepping out to fight Zuko. I felt like that was quite a nice scene. Did you like that scene?
I think so. And that was also in the Nickelodeon series as well, where Aang and Zuko face off for a bit, and I think they did a good job bringing that to life.
You mean Sokka and Zuko face off or Aang and Zuko face off?
Oh, sorry. Well, actually, both. And it was, I think, in the Nickelodeon series is very quick. Zuko
Ah,
basically wipes the
yeah,
floor with soccer. I
yeah,
think they
yeah,
gave
yeah,
soccer a bit more here.
yeah, 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 yeah. That rings a bell. Um, and then we're towards the end of the episode, right? So Aang gives himself up to
Yeah.
Zuko to kind of, forestall Zuko and his squad, destroying Wolf Cove. And then Aang's imprisoned on the ship, but he does this neat little trick with uh, you know, air bending the keys of the prison guard away and manages to escape from his prison cell. Um, and and Sokka and Katara come on Appa to rescue him.
Yeah. What do you have any thoughts about that whole sequence?
Not any profound thoughts.
I have
I
one. I have
I
one.
okay, you go.
Okay. There is one thing that I was hoping to see and they removed it,
Uh-huh.
which was when Aang is escaping. In the Nickelodeon series, he jumps off one of the high levels of the tower of the ship, and he's got his glider, and he's gonna sail off and escape. But at the last second, Zuko like appears behind him, jumps to catch him. And it's like Zuko puts himself into that jump, jumping off the level into midair, and almost like plummets to his death, but
Yeah.
just manages to grab Aang's ankle, and the extra weight of Zuko means Aang can't fly, and he they fall.
They fall back onto the ship.
Yeah, and then there's more. The sequence, the action scene continues. I thought that scene was really good because it is the first little hint at how determined Zuko is.
Mm.
That he's willing to make that leap and risk his life. And then in the future, when we learn more about Zuko, we understand like this is why he's so desperate to capture Aang. So that little taste was something was a bit sad that they excluded. That being said, I think they do go more into Zuko in later episodes of the Netflix series, which again I won't talk about. But
Mm.
so I do think they make up for it. But I was just a bit sad that they excluded that scene.
Oh, I wish that they had included it, and I'm glad you brought up that scene because it's such a good example of like storytelling, but told not through dialogue, but through action, right? Like
Yes.
that simple action of Zuko launching himself pretty much to his death to try and capture the Avatar in that one single, action of jumping is so telling of like who he is as a person and what he wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that is a shame that they didn't include that. I do you remember if they had the notebook, Zuko's notebook in the original?
As far as I remember, I don't think so. Again,
Mm,
unless I'm drawing a
okay,
blank on this one.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I thought I
Yeah,
didn't mind. That was cool. It added a little bit more to Aang's exploration, his journey. He got to read about the Avatar,
the
about
previous
who he
avatars.
is through
Yeah,
the notebook.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I thought that was a nice little thing to add.
Yeah, I thought it was nice too. In a way, it sort of demonstrated Zuko's obsessiveness and how long he'd been kind of researching and hunting. Yeah,
That's a good point, and it kind of ties to a different way of showing Zuko's desperation and determination.
yeah. I still like the launching himself at Aang and punching Aang's foot and them both falling to the ship though.
Yes.
All right. And then the final scene is we go back to the Southern Air Temple, which is now destroyed. And Aang grieves. He finds Gyatso's remains and goes into the Avatar state, which is, quite a visual and dramatic demonstration of his grieving. I quite liked this scene as a final scene for the episode. I feel like it kind of brought the episode into, like it gave the episode a nice sense of closure and brought us back to the events that happened, 100 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think you said it well. It gave closure a bit to Aang's the start of his journey now, as well as Sokka and Katara and how they're going to travel with him,
Hmm.
uh, and also to Zuko because of the way that when Aang's talking, the it shows Zuko, and it kind of it suggests a parallel between Aang and Zuko, which is a theme in Avatar throughout. And so they've brought that right into episode one, which again, like we said before, how they seem to be bringing the themes that were and the character development and character traits that were in the Nickelodeon series addressed later. They're front loading it, um, addressing it real early on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mean that they like interspersed cuts of Zuko, like while Aang was talking in
Yes,
that
that's
final
right. That's
scene?
right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't notice that.
Or yeah, they cut to Zuko, I think just once, or I think so.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it almost felt like Aang supposedly he was supposed to be talking about himself, but it almost felt like he was talking about Zuko.
Ah, I may have to watch that again because interestingly enough, although I think it's really interesting that you point out that Aang and Zuko have some character similarities and character parallels because I have never really thought that, and maybe I'm a bit oblivious, but that's a really I didn't really see them as being that I didn't draw those links. So I'm glad that you pointed that out, and I'm gonna like file that away as we talk about coming episodes. I guess you're right in that they both have a sense of having failed, and they're both like really driven to make reparations for some failure that they're still really like grappling with, and they want to do something to restore a particular kind of world order that they believe, that they really believe in, or some they both have a um, grand plan or a grand goal that they are
Yeah.
both very driven towards. Interesting, interesting. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Did you have any final thoughts? Anything you really liked, you didn't like, or any other kind of comments about the episode at all?
No, I think we've actually covered everything I had in mind to talk about. I guess closing thoughts was that I liked it. Um, I know we've talked about pros and cons of that, but overall, I really liked it. It made me invested in the characters, and it made me want to keep watching. So yeah,
Mm,
it was good. What?
Yeah, we
How
took
about you? Do
a
you have any closing thoughts?
we took a really deep dive into episode one. This was like a much more detailed conversation than I expected it to be, which is cool.
Yes, it was. It, it was a lot
As
longer
our
than I
as
expected to talk about in episode
Yeah,
one.
yeah, as our conversations tend to be. I think that's to me, that's why we decided to start a podcast, right? Like we often end up having these conversations that um go on for much longer than we expect them to, and the people around us get glazed expressions. So why not subject the internet to our ramblings?
Yes, why not? Exactly. That's exactly right.
Um, yeah, final thoughts. I No final thoughts like you. I actually felt really excited after I finished watching episode one. I felt like it was very nostalgic. I thought that, like we nitpicked at a few details, but overall, I felt like the casting was very good and the vibe of the characters, I really liked, like Katara, in particular, Zuko, we mentioned. I thought that, yeah, the characters were fantastic. The world building was super immersive, and it got me really excited to see various locations, in the world of Avatar. My final remark is that the probably one of my favorite moments in episode one was when it was this cutscene where like Katara and Sokka are trying to decide how to chase Zuko's ship and rescue Aang after Zuko has captured Aang. And Sokka's like, oh, if we take the boat, it may take ages to catch up. And then Katara's like, we could go another way. And Sokka's like, Sokka's like, you'll never get me on. And then the scene cuts and he's like screaming as they're riding on Appa. Anyway, I thought that single cut and change of scene transition had the most OG vibes of the
That was
whole
very
episode.
soccer. Yes, definitely,
It was,
100%.
wasn't it? All right. So if that's it, we have come to the end of our inaugural episode. Thank you for joining us on RDDIWTOF, also known as random deep dives into whatever tickles our fancy, bracket working title. We hope you will join us for episode two very soon. Thanks,
Yes,
everyone.
where we can talk
Bye.
about episode two. Bye,
Yes.
everyone.
Bye.